I'm going to read that from Exodus. Honor your father and mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. Now this one of the kids' 10 Commandments just says, obey your parents. Pretty simple. Pretty simple. Most of these from here on out are pretty simple. The Greek word for honor means revere, prize, value. So honor is actually showing respect. And if no other reason, we should respect our parents. You know, they're the ones that give us life. They raised us. Their world was centered around us. We really, God is very, very emphatic on respecting your parents. And if not only just sort of a rank kind of thing, think of it like the President of the United States. Okay, you may not agree with who's president, you may not agree on their policies, but their office, where they're at, just, you should respect that. You should respect the leader of your country, okay? So in that way, you should always respect your parents. And I know there are parents out there that seem like, children, and God allows for that. I mean, He allows for but He still wants you to respect and to honor them. The only thing that God has issues with is if your parents, and there are some out there that ask things of you that are blatantly wrong, or are leading you in a path of something that goes totally against God's way. And then we are to always choose God's way, always. But the really most important thing to remember about this, and the most wonderful thing about this commandment, is that it comes with a promise. And none of the other commandments come with a promise. This one comes with a promise. And in Ephesians, it's stated many different times in the Bible, but in Ephesians 6, 1 through 3, it says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you, and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. That is God's promise to us. God's promise to us, and it's right there, and it's right there ready for us to claim, because that's what we're to do with God's promises. He has many, 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 many promises throughout the Bible, but we are to take and claim them. We are to say, God, that promise is for me. You promised it to me, and I want that promise from you. And this is the commandment with the promise. And He is saying that if you love, care, respect, revere your parents, and show them the respect they deserve, and be there for them, that you will live long in the land, that you will be given a blessing. He will heap blessings on you for doing that. And that is an absolute promise for God. And in the same token, as we must revere and respect our parents, it's also kind of saying to us, people who have reached a stage in their lives, they've gotten older and they need more help. We should be there for all older people, for anyone that is, it's kind of no different than what right now you are trying to make arrangements now for your mom. That's honoring her. That's honoring her and trying to help her and keep her in her home. And all those things, that is exactly how God wants us to live. Back in the Israelites' time, when they got these commandments, we always kind of go back to that time. And back in Bible days, I mean, parents ended up living with their children, and most of the time it seemed to be the oldest son that always would take on the responsibility of taking care of the parents. And the parents then would live with, and then many, many nations still today, many ethnic groups out there still today, that is absolutely, I believe in Japan, that is still the way. The parents still end up living with the children, and till the day they die, they are taken care of by somebody, but usually it is the oldest child, or if somebody else needs to step in. So that's always been in the culture of, we as Americans have kind of drifted away from that over the years. I think back years and years ago, it was more of a thing, but we have become more mobile. We travel to work, we end up in all other places than, people used to congregate in groups and stay basically close to home. But people move a lot now. People, not only do they move a lot, but they of course, they take on different jobs in their life. For whatever reason, right now is crazy busy. Everybody's lives are crazy busy. And so a lot of times we think, oh yeah, I'd like to do that, but I'm just too busy, and I'd like to go help out mom and dad, but I'm just too busy. And basically this commandment is saying, no, we still need to be able, we still need to do that. That is so important that we need to make that time. We need to take that time to do it, because it's very, very, very important. The Bible tells us that in end times, whenever they talk about end times, and then this verse is in the book of Revelations, it's also in 2 Timothy, that when end times, I'm going to read you this one, in 2 Timothy 3:2. People, it says, there will be terrible times in the last days. That's what precedes it in verse 1. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy. And those are the things that God warns us is going to happen towards the end times. And all of those things, a lot of times, who do we direct sometimes some of our worst behavior at? Our parents. We do that. I know I've done it before. We do that because we feel safe with them. We know they love us unconditionally. And so there's times that they get our worst behavior a lot of times because of that. Because we know no matter what we do to them, no matter what, they're still going to always be there for us. They're going to love us unconditionally. But we still are to very much be there for them. And we need to honor them in both actions and attitude. In other words, this is not just lip service. It's not just saying, boy, I just love my parents so much. They are the most awesome people in the world. But then we never put any action to those words. We don't then visit or you kind of have an idea of maybe some of their needs, as they age. Just the things that we can do for them and be there for them. So we can't just have lip service, like I said. We have to put action to it too. So basically, let me see what time it is, because I got to see what I can cover. Okay, so that's basically what we want to do with obeying the parents. It's just, like I said, critically important, and it's very, very important to God, and it's very important to the family structure. Okay, so number 6 is, and I don't need to read it out of the Bible because it's about as simple as could be. It's thou shalt not kill. And of course in here it says, do not harm anyone. Thou shalt not, actually my Bible says thou shalt not murder, and most Bibles now do say thou shalt not murder. Because there is a difference between murder and kill. Murder is taking for no reason at all, taking a human life, or taking any life for that matter, is the real definition of thou shalt not murder. Kill, there's been many, many, many times, and you think of basically killing as being in wartime. There's been many, many times throughout the history of the Bible, from the early days on, and it's always been in times of war, but God has wiped out whole nations. He's wiped out whole tribes. He's wiped out whole, and allowed that to happen when they were against him and against his word, and his people needed to further along, and they wiped out whole groups of people. That is in God's, so he would not say, basically thou shalt not kill, because that has happened many times when it was for good reason. We had a minister here, which most of y'all know, but we had a minister here a couple preachers ago, and he stood up here one time and said, when he was talking about the 10 Commandments, he said that he had broken every single one of them. So I'm kind of sitting in the pew thinking, boy, okay, kind of going through all of them thinking, wow. And I realized he was a Vietnam War vet, and so he had unfortunately killed people. And so, but if you kind of go through line, he said, that that's something he wasn't proud of, but that it, none of them actually, but it shows the forgiving power of God, because there he stood up at the pulpit and gave his life to Christ later in his life, and in his later years he decided to go into the ministry. So, and he's still preaching. He came back, he left this area for a while, now he's back, and he's got 2 churches down in Tipton and Grazierville, so, he's still going strong in his 70s, but that was his testimony that day on the 10 Commandments, that he had broken every single one of them at some time in his life. So, but we have to, because when I think of that commandment, and I thought of when he first got, as a matter of fact, we were discussing it at home when I said, thou shalt not murder. It's kind of like one of those no, kind of things. Just don't do it. Just don't do it. Like what else do you say? Just don't do it. But yet there is a lot to say, because that is what, like, the first thing was differentiating between what murder and killing is, because they are totally different. But the reasons behind why these things happen, that's one of the big things. I know there's always a rule, hard and full, fast rule in our house, and I don't know whether in all of your other your homes too growing up, was hate a bad word in your house? Okay, so, Mom always said, you don't say hate, because that's a bad word, and it is very true. It's kind of like rates right up there with shut up, just don't say shut up. But do not hate, and hate is often very much behind, and actually God says in the Bible that if we hate our brother, and we have hate in our heart for our brother, that it's the same as murder. That it's absolutely the same, because that is an emotion that absolutely should not be there, and that is what leads to murderous thoughts and murder, because you have jealousy, envy, anger and rage, and hate. All those things, and when they consume you, and they plant themselves in your heart, then that is the same as murder, and oftentimes it leads to murder. You think of all the horrible cases through the years of, and now all the cases, well, we live in a time, when I think about back in there, again, the Bible days, Cain was the first murderer, when he murdered his brother Abel, and it just has gone on from there, that murder has been in every step of the Bible in some way or another, and murder has been now in our lives constantly, just in, and when you look at the person who they find is the murderer, like Zane called me when I was away, and he told me about what happened in Maine this week, and how horrible that was, and it's just one on top of another, and it's all inside your heart when it is full of that, of hatred and like I said, of just all the emotions that, anger especially, that bring about the possibility then that you may go on to do something like that. Whereas if you took, and God would be the answer here, because he takes all those emotions out of your heart and replaces them with love and joy and peace and understanding. And when you are filled with those kind of things in your heart, you don't even think about things such as murder. Then we go on to our next commandment, and I am going to go ahead and do this. I know we're at the very end, but I'll see through this, and that'll leave 3 then for next week. And that is, thou shalt not commit adultery. I have to read you this because it is one of the best verses in the Bible. Proverbs, which Proverbs is just an awesome book. It is so full of wisdom. And Proverbs 6:32 says, but a man who commits adultery has no sense. Whoever does so destroys himself. And so that is so very true. And the poster child in the Bible for that would have been King David. And it's kind kind of ironic because Proverbs is written by Solomon, who was David's king, so he kind of was writing a little story about his dad. And King David was one of God's chosen. He was God wrote right in the Bible, David is a man after my own heart. I know he will do everything that I want. And yet David succumbed to this sin. And he was married, and Bathsheba was married. He noticed Bathsheba and he thought, wow, I really, like what I'm seeing. And he asked for Bathsheba to be brought to his palace, and they had an affair, and their baby was produced. And of course, Bathsheba basically told David, I'm pregnant. And that, of course, her husband had been away at battle, fighting David's battles. He was the king, or not the king, the leader of the army at that time. And his name was Uriah. And so he tried to bring Uriah back so he could be with Bathsheba, so he could come home. But Uriah was such a good soldier. He said, no, I will not come back. I will not come back. My men are here, and I'm staying here with my men. And so David did the unthinkable. He ordered Uriah sent to the very front of the combat, to the very heated, the worst part that could possibly be. And of course he was killed. And so David took Bathsheba in and made her his wife, because they had many wives back then, so made her one of his wives, and thought that was the answer. But God knows everything we do. God knows absolutely everything. So of course he visited David, and he made himself known to David and said, what have you done? How could you have ever done this? You have sinned way beyond of any kind of sin. And he told David that this child will not live. This child cannot live. This child is a product of sin and will not live. But the sin was twofold, threefold. There were so many sins upon sins there in David's story. And it's also a really great reminder, because that's exactly what happened. The child was born, and the child was very ill, and David just fasted for days. He tore his clothes, he put ashes on himself, he would not be around anybody, he prayed nonstop all day long, into the night. The next day, he prayed every single day while that child lived, and that child was eventually taken. And David knew that, the Lord had said that would happen, and he accepted that, and he prayed to God to forgive him, and that he knew he had done wrong, and God did. God did. He absolutely forgave him, and David was the greatest king, actually, the greatest king, actually, in the Bible, was King David, and he had done that. And so, like I said, he's the poster child for this verse. But it is absolutely a sin between the individual and God, but it's also an injustice that harms one of life's most important things, and that's the family unit. When adultery doesn't just affect the person, it affects the family. The family, there's the consequences just go on down through, because it is by far the most hurtful thing that one person can do to another person, is just totally take the bond of marriage and just desecrate it. It is an extremely important commandment in God's eyes, because that is something that you do not do that to. It's just something you do not do, because it is the most hurtful, the most damaging, the most to any relationship. And we are to hold marriage sacred, and we are to hold marriage, dear, and our partner should be held above all others. It's very interesting that it is so much easier, like way easier, to get a marriage license right now than it is to get a driver's license. A driver's license requires us to kind of take a little course. Then we have to get a booklet, we got to study, and then we got to take that test. And then we have to drive for 6 months with somebody else. And then we have to take another test. And marriage, we just go to the courthouse and get a license. That's all we have to do. And there is nothing, they don't give us a little booklet at the courthouse, they don't give us anything. But what people sometimes miss is that this right here is our booklet, okay? If we follow what God's way is, we will get through that marriage, because the only difference, I wrote this down because it was really good, the only difference between people who stay married and people who divorce, it's not the problems, because we all have problems. There is not a one of us that doesn't have any problems in marriage. But the difference is the commitment. Okay, we can stay committed if we keep God in our lives and God in our marriage. We can absolutely stay committed. So really, when you commit adultery, what you have done is you failed in your commitment, because you pledged to that person that you're going to love them and them only. And when you do something to totally tear that commitment apart, that's what that is, the emotional pain and the scarring that it causes. And it isn't, like I said, it isn't just the individuals, it is the family unit that you have produced as well. And you just can totally tear that apart.